The cotton swab scraped against Emma's cheek like sandpaper against my last nerve. My 10-year-old daughter giggled, completely oblivious to the fact that her school ancestry project was about to blow up my entire world. "Dad, this is so cool," she said, sealing the tube with the enthusiasm only kids possess. "Mrs. Peterson says we might find out we're related to famous people." I forced a smile. "Yes, sweetheart. Famous people." Melinda walked into the kitchen, her social worker badge still clipped to her blouse. 16 years of marriage, and I could read her moods like blueprints. Tonight she looked tired, distant. "You're really doing this DNA thing?" she asked, pouring coffee with mechanical precision. "It's for school," I said, watching her face for any flicker of concern. Nothing, just the same detached expression she'd worn for months. "Seems like a waste of money." "It's $12, Mel." She shrugged, already checking her phone. Always checking that damn phone. Emma bounced toward the door. "Jacob's doing his tomorrow. We're going to compare results." After she left, silence filled the kitchen like smoke. Melinda kept scrolling through whatever held her attention more than her family these days. "Working late again tonight?" I asked. "Case conference." She didn't look up. "Might be really late." I nodded, filing that information away with all the other lies I'd been collecting. 3 months of case conferences that ran until midnight. 3 months of hushed phone calls and sudden errands. The next morning, I drove both samples to the lab myself. Emma chatted about school friends while Jacob dozed in his car seat. 8 years old and still needing naps. My boys, my kids. Or so I thought. A week later, my buddy Dale from the forensics lab called while I was reviewing structural plans for a new office complex. "Logan, you got a minute? What's up?" His voice dropped. "That ancestry thing you had me run?" "The girl's sample." My hand stopped moving across the blueprints. "Yeah? Man, I don't know how to tell you this, but she's not yours." The pencil snapped in my fingers. "What?" "The DNA doesn't match. Not even close. I ran it twice, thinking there was a mistake." The office walls seemed to tilt inward. "Are you sure?" "Dead sure, Logan. I'm sorry." I hung up without another word. Sat there staring at the structural drawing of a building that would outlast my marriage, outlast my family, outlast everything I thought I knew about my life. That afternoon, I collected Jacob's cheek swab myself. Told him it was a fun science experiment, just like his sister's. He trusted me completely, the way kids trust their fathers. 2 days later, Dale called again. "Same result," he said quietly. "I'm really sorry, man." I drove home in a daze, parked in the driveway, and sat in the silence of my Honda Civic for 20 minutes. The house I'd helped design looked foreign suddenly. The mortgage payments, the family photos, the careful savings account, all of it built on a lie. When I finally walked inside, Melinda was cooking dinner. Spaghetti and meatballs, the kids' favorite. She hummed while stirring the sauce, completely unaware that I'd just discovered our entire life was fiction. "How was work?" she asked without turning around. I studied the back of her head, the way her dark hair fell across her shoulders. The same woman I'd fallen in love with in college. The same woman who'd carried 2 children that weren't mine. "Fine," I said. "Just fine." Emma ran up and hugged my legs. "Dad, when do we get our ancestry results?" I looked down at her bright eyes, her trusting smile. She had Melinda's nose, but now I could see other features. Stronger jaw, different eye shape. "Soon, sweetheart." Real soon. That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat in my garage workshop and did what I always do when the world stops making sense. I planned. Step 1, find out who the real father was. Step 2, make sure justice got served. I opened my laptop and started typing. 3 weeks into my new reality, I became the perfect husband. "Honey, I think we should try counseling," I said over breakfast, reaching across to squeeze Melinda's hand. She nearly choked on her orange juice. "Counseling? Why?" I manufactured the right amount of vulnerability. "I feel like we've been distant lately. I want to fix whatever's wrong." Her eyes searched my face for deception and found only manufactured sincerity. "Logan, I think that's a really good idea." Emma and Jacob ate their cereal, oblivious to the performance unfolding around them. Kids that age live in the moment. They don't see the cracks in the foundation until the whole house comes down. "I love you," I told Melinda and kissed her forehead. "Whatever's bothering you, we can work through it." She started crying then. Real tears. Probably the first genuine emotion she'd shown me in months. I love you too, she whispered. The lie tasted like ashes in my mouth. That afternoon, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Dr. Sarah Chen, a marriage counselor with excellent reviews and a 3-week waiting list. I scheduled our first session and paid the deposit. The second call went to Nora Valdez, a private investigator recommended by a colleague whose wife had been cheating with her tennis instructor. What exactly do you want to know? Nora asked. Her voice was all business, no judgment. Everything. Where she goes, who she sees, what she's hiding. Standard surveillance package runs $500 a day plus expenses. Money's not an issue. I'll need a recent photo and her daily routine. I emailed Melinda's information within the hour. Our first counseling session was scheduled for Thursday evening. Melinda seemed nervous, fidgeting with her wedding ring during the drive. What if she asks about things we don't want to discuss? She said. Like what? I don't know. Private things. I kept my eyes on the road. We don't have to hide anything from each other, do we? She went quiet after that. Dr. Chen's office was all earth tones and inspirational posters. The kind of place designed to make people feel safe enough to confess their secrets. What brings you both here today? Dr. Chen asked after we'd settled into her plush chairs. I looked at Melinda expectantly. She twisted her ring again. We've been growing apart, she said finally. I feel like Logan works too much, and I've been dealing with some difficult cases at work. I want to be more present, I added. I realized I might be taking our family for granted. For 45 minutes, we performed the dance of a couple trying to save their marriage. I played the part of the devoted husband, recognizing his flaws. Melinda played the overwhelmed wife seeking connection. Neither of us mentioned the real problems. Friday morning, Nora called. Your wife's been meeting someone, she said, twice this week at the Riverside Diner on 5th Street. Always the same guy. My blood went cold. Description? Mid-40s, construction worker build, drives a red pickup truck. They seem familiar with each other. Get me photos. Already did? Emailing them now. I opened the attachment on my phone and nearly dropped it. Brian Russo, Melinda's ex-husband, the man she divorced 8 months before we started dating. The man who disappeared from her life so completely that she rarely mentioned him. Except he hadn't disappeared at all. I stared at the photo of them holding hands across the diner table. Melinda's face showed more animation than I'd seen from her in months. Brian was leaning forward, talking intensely, his hand covering hers. The timeline clicked into place like puzzle pieces. Emma was 10, Jacob was 8. Melinda and I had started dating 9.5 years ago. She'd gotten pregnant with Emma 6 months after we met, or so she'd told me. But if Brian was Emma's father, then Melinda had been sleeping with both of us right from the beginning. I saved the photos to a secure folder and deleted the email. That evening, I suggested we order pizza and have a family movie night. The kids picked some animated garbage about talking cars, but I barely paid attention. Instead, I studied their faces in the flickering screen light, cataloging all the features that weren't mine. Jacob had Brian's thick eyebrows. Emma had his dimpled chin. How had I been so blind? Daddy, you're not watching, Emma complained. Sorry, sweetheart, just thinking about work. Melinda curled up against my shoulder, seeking the comfort of a man whose life she'd destroyed. I wrapped my arm around her and held her close, already planning her destruction. Monday morning brought another call from Nora. Got something interesting, she said. Your boy Brian doesn't know about the kids. What? I listened in on their conversation yesterday. She's never told him he's the father. Keeps talking about how guilty she feels, how she wishes things were different, but she's terrified of disrupting the kids' lives. I felt something cold settle in my chest. She's protecting him. Seems like it. Also protecting herself. If he knew the truth, he might demand custody, child support, the whole mess. Keep watching them. I want to know everything. After I hung up, I sat in my truck outside the construction site where I was consulting on a new apartment complex. Men in hard hats carried lumber and operated machinery, building something solid and real while my world crumbled into lies. Brian Russo thought he was stealing another man's wife. He had no idea he was just reclaiming what had always been his. But he was about to find out. And when he did, I'd make sure they both paid the price for 16 years of deception. Cheryl Moss had the kind of sharp intelligence that cut through legal complexities like a scalpel through flesh. Her downtown office overlooked the courthouse, which seemed appropriate for what I had in mind. Estate planning at 38 seems premature, she said, reviewing the documents I'd requested. Unless there's something you're not telling me. My wife's a social worker. I'm an engineer. We see what happens to families when people don't plan ahead. Cheryl nodded approvingly. Smart thinking. The durable power of attorney will give your wife complete financial authority if you become incapacitated. The beneficiary transfer forms ensure smooth asset transition, and this blind trust setup. That's sophisticated protection. I want everything bulletproof, I said. My family's security depends on it. What I didn't mention was that bulletproof worked both ways. The documents were elegant in their simplicity. The durable POA granted Melinda sweeping authority over my finances, making her legally responsible for any debts or obligations incurred. The blind trust shifted our assets into a complex web of legal entities that I controlled, but she would be liable for. Have her sign everything in front of a notary, Cheryl advised. I recommend starting with the smaller documents first, then building up to the trust paperwork. Any chance she'd get suspicious? Not if you frame it right. Most people see estate planning as boring paperwork, not financial warfare. I smiled. Perfect. That evening, I presented the documents to Melinda as a romantic gesture. I've been thinking about our future, I said, spreading the papers across the kitchen table after the kids went to bed. What happens to Emma and Jacob if something happens to me? Her face softened. Logan, you don't have to worry about that. But I do. My job has risks, construction sites, unstable structures. I want to know you and the children are protected. I walked her through each document, explaining how the power of attorney would let her access our accounts immediately, how the beneficiary transfers would avoid probate, how the trust would protect our assets from taxes and lawsuits. It seems so complicated, she said, scanning the legal language. That's why I hired the best lawyer in town. All you have to do is sign. She hesitated at the signature line of the POA document. This gives me a lot of control over your money. You're my wife. Who else would I trust? The pen moved across the paper in slow, careful strokes. Each signature was another link in the chain I was forging around her. While she signed, I thought about Brian Russo, about his construction company, his lake house project, his complete ignorance of the trap closing around him. There, Melinda said, setting down the pen. I feel like I just agreed to something I don't understand. You agreed to protect our family, I said, kissing her cheek. That's all that matters. The next morning, I made another visit to Cheryl's office. I need to establish a shell corporation, I said, something tied to my wife's social security number, but with my operational control. Cheryl raised an eyebrow. That's unusual. What's the business purpose? Real estate investment. I want her name on the paperwork for tax advantages, but I'll handle the actual management. She pulled up incorporation documents on her computer. We'll need her signature on the corporate filings. Already have power of attorney. That works. What's the company name? I'd given this considerable thought. Meridian Holdings, LLC. Within a week, Meridian Holdings existed as a legal entity. Bank account opened. Credit line established. All tied to Melinda's identity. All under my control. The final piece required more creativity. I drove to Brian's construction site on a Tuesday afternoon, wearing my safety vest and carrying an official-looking clipboard. Construction sites were easy to infiltrate if you looked like you belonged. Brian was directing a concrete pour, his red pickup truck parked nearby. I'd done my research. He was renovating a lake house as a personal project, doing most of the electrical work himself to save money. Excuse me, I called out. City Inspector, I need to verify the permit status on 847 Lakeshore Drive. Brian looked annoyed. That's my personal project. Everything's up to code. I'm sure it is, but we had a complaint about unpermitted electrical work. You got your permit paperwork handy? His face darkened. What complaint? Anonymous tip. Says you're doing commercial-grade electrical installation without proper permits. That's bullcrap. I know the code better than most electricians. I scribbled notes on my clipboard. Maybe so, but I still need to see documentation. You can bring it down to City Hall tomorrow, or I can schedule a formal inspection. Fine. I'll bring the paperwork. Good. Ask for Inspector Morrison in the permits office. There was no Inspector Morrison, of course, but by the time Brian figured that out, other wheels would already be turning. That evening, I filed a formal code violation complaint against 847 Lakeshore Drive, citing unpermitted electrical modifications and potential safety hazards. The city would have to investigate within 10 business days. I also sent an anonymous tip to the IRS reporting suspicious cash transactions related to Brian's construction business. Tax authorities moved slower than city inspectors, but they were thorough. Melinda seemed distant during dinner, picking at her food while the kids chatted about school. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just tired, heavy caseload. Maybe you should take some time off. We could plan a family vacation." She forced a smile. "That sounds nice." But her phone buzzed with a text message, and her attention disappeared again. I caught a glimpse of the name on her screen before she turned it face down. Brian. "Excuse me," she said, heading toward the bathroom. "Work call." I waited 60 seconds, then followed quietly. Her hushed voice carried through the thin door. "Can't keep meeting like this. Logan's getting suspicious. Need more time to figure things out." I returned to the dinner table before she finished her work call. That night, after she fell asleep, I went through her phone. The conversation history with Brian went back months. Deleted regularly, but not completely. The most recent exchange made my blood freeze. Brian, "I miss what we had. I miss us." Melinda, "I miss it too, but the kids, Logan. It's complicated." Brian, "Some things are worth the complication." Melinda, "I know. I just need more time." I screenshotted everything and uploaded it to a secure cloud account. Then, I sat in my garage workshop, surrounded by the tools and blueprints that had always made sense to me, and planned the next phase of their destruction. Justice required patience, but it also required precision, and I was very good at both. The Hendersons' backyard barbecue was the perfect stage for my performance. 30 neighbors, cold beer, and the kind of suburban atmosphere where everyone pretended their lives were as perfect as their lawns. I'd suggested that Melinda invite Brian. "Didn't you mention he was working on the Morrison project downtown? I'd love to pick his brain about structural challenges." She'd looked surprised. "You want to meet Brian?" "Why not? You talk about him sometimes. Seems like a decent guy." The lie came so easily it scared me. Brian arrived at 6:30, wearing jeans and a polo shirt that showed off his construction worker build. Melinda's face lit up when she saw him, then quickly dimmed when she remembered where she was. "Logan, this is Brian Russo," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Brian, my husband Logan." I extended my hand with a genuine smile. "Great to finally meet you. Mel's told me a lot about your work." Brian's handshake was firm, confident. "Likewise, she says you're in structural engineering. Mostly commercial stuff. Boring compared to your hands-on work." We talked shop for 20 minutes, standing near the grill while Ted Henderson flipped burgers. Brian was knowledgeable, articulate, completely unaware that he was talking to a man whose life he'd destroyed. "I'm working on a lake house renovation," he said, "doing most of the electrical myself. These old places have quirky wiring." "Electrical can be tricky," I said, sipping my beer. "One mistake and you're looking at serious fire hazards. Tell me about it. I've got the city inspector breathing down my neck over some permit issue." I shook my head sympathetically. "City bureaucrats. They probably don't understand real construction." Melinda joined us carrying a plate of potato salad. Her hands were shaking slightly. "You two seem to be hitting it off," she said. "Brian's telling me about his lake house project," I said, wrapping my arm around her waist. "Sounds like a labor of love." Brian's eyes flickered to my hand on Melinda's hip, then back to my face. "Yeah, it's been a long-term project. Some things are worth the patience." The double meaning wasn't lost on any of us. "I always wanted my family back," Brian continued, his voice casual but his eyes locked on mine. "Didn't think I'd have to go through someone else to get it." The challenge was clear. Melinda went rigid against my side. I laughed, raising my beer bottle. "To family, and to the real fathers who protect them." Brian's smile faltered. He lifted his bottle slowly, confusion flickering across his features. "To real fathers," he echoed. We drank to his destruction. Later, while the kids played cornhole and the adults sat around the fire pit, My buddy Theo arrived. I'd called him earlier, knowing his expertise would be useful. "Logan, good to see you," Theo said, shaking hands. "Mind if I grab a beer?" Theodore Marks was 45, retired from the police force after taking a bullet in the leg during a domestic call. Now he ran a small auto repair shop and helped friends with odd jobs that required discretion. "Theo, meet Brian Russo. Brian, this is Theo. We've been friends since high school." "Nice to meet you," Brian said. "Likewise. Logan tells me you're in construction." "That's right." "Currently renovating a lake house." Theo's eyes sharpened with professional interest. "Doing your own electrical?" "Most of it. Why?" "Just curious. I see a lot of electrical fires in my line of work. Usually comes down to faulty wiring or overloaded circuits." Brian looked uncomfortable. "I know what I'm doing." "I'm sure you do. Mind if I take a look sometime? I like seeing quality work." "Maybe. It's still pretty rough." I watched the exchange with satisfaction. Theo had been briefed on Brian's project earlier in the week. His casual offer wasn't casual at all. As the evening wound down, neighbors started gathering their children and saying goodbyes. Brian lingered, clearly wanting to talk to Melinda privately. "Thanks for inviting me," he said, shaking my hand again. "This was nice. Anytime. Maybe we can grab a lunch sometime? Talk about that Morrison project?" "Yeah, maybe." He walked toward his truck, then stopped and turned back. "Logan, your breaker box is unsafe. You should get that fixed." My smile never wavered. "Thanks for the heads up. I'll have Theo take a look." After he left, Melinda was quiet during cleanup. The kids helped carry plates inside while the adults folded chairs. "That went well," I said. "Brian seems like a good guy." "He is," she said softly. "Maybe we should have him over for dinner sometime. I think the kids would like him." Melinda's face went pale. "I don't think that's necessary." "Why not?" "He's your friend." She looked at me with something approaching terror. "Logan, I know, honey. I know everything." The plate slipped from her hands and shattered on the patio stones. But I kept smiling, kept playing the role of the understanding husband, even as I watched her world start to crumble, just like I'd planned. The confession came on a Thursday night in September, after the kids were asleep, and the house had settled into its evening quiet. Melinda sat on our bed, finally ready to unload the weight she'd been carrying. "Logan, I need to tell you something." I looked up from my laptop where I'd been reviewing structural specifications for a shopping center expansion. "What's on your mind?" She took a shaky breath. "I've been seeing Brian." The shock on my face was perfectly calibrated. "What do you mean, seeing?" Not like that. Just talking. Meeting for coffee sometimes." I closed the laptop and gave her my full attention. "How long?" "A few months." "Maybe longer." I let the silence stretch between us, watching her squirm. Then I reached over and took her hand. "Are you having an affair?" "No, God, no. We talk about old times, about what went wrong between us." "Do you still love him?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Melinda's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know, maybe." "Logan, I'm so confused." I squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you for telling me." "You're not angry?" "I'm hurt, but I'm glad you were honest." What she didn't know was that I'd been recording our conversation on my phone, which was sitting face down on the nightstand with the voice memo app running. "Brian feels like home," she continued, the words spilling out now that the dam had broken. "When I'm with him, I remember who I used to be, before responsibilities and mortgages and trying to be someone I'm not." "Who are you trying to be?" "The perfect wife, the perfect mother, someone worthy of a man like you." I felt something cold and vicious uncurl in my chest. "You are worthy, Mel. You're the mother of my children." She started crying then, really crying, and I held her while she sobbed against my shoulder. Her tears soaked through my t-shirt, each drop another nail in her coffin. The next morning, I edited the recording to isolate the most damaging parts. "Brian feels like home. When I'm with him, I remember who I used to be. I don't know. Maybe I still love him." I uploaded the audio file to an anonymous email account and sent it to Brian with the subject line, "Something you should know." Then I waited. Brian's reaction was swift and explosive. According to Nora's surveillance report, he called Melinda within an hour of receiving the email, demanding to meet immediately. They met at Riverside Park, away from their usual diner. Nora captured their argument with a telephoto lens and directional microphone. "You told him about us?" Brian shouted, his face red with anger. "I had to. He was getting suspicious. So you threw me under the bus? I didn't tell him everything. Just that we've been talking." "What about the kids, Mel? What about Emma and Jacob?" Melinda went rigid. "What about them?" "Don't play dumb. We both know the timeline. They're Logan's children." "Are they?" The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Finally, Melinda spoke in a voice so quiet that Nora had to enhance the audio to make it audible. "Yes. They're his." Brian grabbed her shoulders. "Look me in the eye and tell me that—" She couldn't do it. "Jesus Christ, Mel. How long were you going to keep this from me? Forever. I was going to keep it forever. Those are my kids." "No." "Logan raised them. Logan loves them. Logan is their father." Brian released her and stepped back, running his hands through his hair. "This is ducked up. This whole situation is completely ducked up, which is why we need to stop seeing each other. No, no way. I'm not walking away from my children. They don't know you exist. Then maybe it's time they learned." Melinda grabbed his arm. "Brian, please, if you care about me at all, you'll leave this alone." "I can't. You have to. What if I demand a paternity test? Then you'll destroy 3 innocent lives for your own selfish needs. What about what I need? What about what I deserve? You deserve honesty, but the kids deserve stability." Brian looked at her for a long moment, his face cycling through anger, hurt, and something approaching desperation. "I want to be part of their lives." "You can't." "Why not?" "Because Logan would never allow it. And if he found out the truth—" She didn't finish the sentence. "What? What would happen?" "He'd take them away from me. He'd divorce me and get custody, and I'd never see them again." Brian's expression softened slightly. "He wouldn't do that. You don't know Logan like I do. He's methodical. He plans everything. If he wanted to destroy me, he'd find a way." I had to admire her insight, even as it sealed her fate. That evening, Melinda came home looking like she'd been hit by a truck. She went through the motions of dinner and homework help, but her mind was clearly elsewhere. "Everything okay?" I asked while we loaded the dishwasher. "Just a difficult case at work." "Want to talk about it?" "Not really." I nodded understandingly. Sometimes work stress follows us home. Yeah. That night, while she slept restlessly beside me, I composed another anonymous message to Brian. This time I included a photograph from Emma's 10th birthday party. Melinda holding both kids while Brian stood in the background, clearly visible but cropped from the original family photo. The message was simple. These children deserve to know their real father. I scheduled it to send at 3 a.m. when people make their worst decisions. By morning, Brian would be forced to choose between respecting Melinda's wishes and claiming what was rightfully his. I already knew which choice he'd make. And when he did, the final phase of my plan could begin. I chose the Hendersons' anniversary dinner for maximum impact. 30 of our closest neighbors, 3 courses, and enough wine to loosen tongues and lower inhibitions. "Logan, this is such a thoughtful surprise," Carol Henderson gushed, as I connected my laptop to their entertainment system. "A slideshow of neighborhood memories." "Just something I put together," I said, adjusting the display settings. "Thought it would be fun to reminisce." Melinda sat at the dining table picking at her salmon. She'd been distant all week, ever since Brian had started pressuring her about the children. According to Nora's reports, he'd been calling constantly, threatening to show up at our house, demanding answers she wasn't ready to give. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, raising my wine glass. Before we dig into Carol's amazing dessert, I thought we'd take a trip down memory lane. The lights dimmed. The first few slides were innocuous neighborhood barbecues, holiday parties, kids' birthday celebrations. Everyone smiled and pointed at younger versions of themselves. Then came slide 15. Emma's paternity test results filled the 60-inch screen in stark black and white. Clinical, undeniable. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. The room went silent. Wine glasses stopped halfway to lips. Someone's fork clattered against their plate. "Logan?" Ted Henderson's voice was confused. "What is this?" I clicked to the next slide. Jacob's results. Same devastating conclusion. "Logan, stop," Melinda whispered, but her voice was lost in the growing murmur of shocked conversation. The next slide was the audio waveform of her confession, with key quotes highlighted in red text. "Brian feels like home. When I'm with him, I remember who I used to be. Maybe I still love him. I pressed play. Melinda's voice filled the room, raw with emotion and devastating in its honesty. Turn it off, she said, louder now. Please, Logan. Turn it off. But I was just getting started. The final slide was a photograph I'd taken through our kitchen window 3 days ago. Melinda and Brian in our backyard, holding each other while the kids played inside. The timestamp showed Tuesday at 4:30 p.m. during her supposed case conference. The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, someone dropping their wine glass. Carol Henderson started crying. Ted looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Melinda stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood. I have to go. She ran toward the door, fumbling with her purse and keys. Half the room watched her flee, while the other half stared at me with expressions ranging from horror to fascination. Well, I said, closing the laptop. I guess that explains why I've been feeling disconnected from my family lately. Brian chose that moment to arrive. He walked through the Hendersons' front door without knocking, probably expecting to find Melinda and continue their ongoing argument about the children. Instead, he found 30 neighbors staring at him like he'd grown a second head. Where is she? He demanded. I stood up slowly, every eye in the room tracking the movement. She left, but I'm glad you're here. We need to talk. You son of a bitch, you planned this. I exposed the truth. There's a difference. Brian stepped forward, his fists clenched. You humiliated her in front of everyone. She humiliated herself. I just provided the evidence. Those are my kids. The room collectively inhaled. Someone's wife grabbed her husband's arm. Are they? I asked. Because they've been calling me daddy for 8 and 10 years, respectively. They don't even know you exist. That's going to change. I smiled, feeling the weight of 30 witnesses to his threat. Is it? You want to explain to Emma and Jacob that their entire life has been a lie? That mommy was cheating on daddy before they were even born? You bastard! No, Brian, that would be your children! He lunged at me then, exactly as I'd hoped he would. We went down hard, knocking over chairs and sending someone's wine glass crashing to the floor. Brian was stronger, but I'd been expecting the attack. Ted Henderson and 2 other men pulled us apart before any real damage was done. Get him out of here, I said, straightening my shirt. Blood trickled from my split lip. Before I call the cops! This isn't over, Brian snarled as Ted and Jim Morrison escorted him toward the door. You're right, I said, reaching into my jacket pocket. It's not. I pulled out a small cardboard box and tossed it at his feet. Fireworks spilled across the floor, leftover 4th of July snappers and bottle rockets. You should be more careful with fire hazards, I said. Old houses burn so easily. The threat was unmistakable. Brian's face went white. You're insane. I'm methodical. There's a difference. After they dragged him outside, I turned to face the room full of shocked neighbors. Some were already reaching for their phones, probably texting other friends about the drama they'd just witnessed. I apologize for disrupting your evening, I said, but sometimes the truth has to come out. Carol Henderson was still crying. Her husband looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. I gathered my laptop and headed for the door, pausing only to address the room one final time. For those wondering about Emma and Jacob, they're innocent in all this. Whatever happens between the adults, those kids deserve protection. I walked out into the night air, leaving behind 30 witnesses to the beginning of the end. The lake house sat on 3 acres of pine trees, isolated enough that screams wouldn't carry to the neighbors. Brian had chosen the location for privacy, never realizing how perfectly it would serve my purposes. Theo and I approached through the woods at 2 a.m. on a moonless Thursday. He carried a toolbox filled with specialized equipment. Wire strippers, voltage testers, and a small propane torch that would leave no traceable residue. You sure about this? He whispered as we reached the construction site. He threatened my family, I said. That makes it self-defense. The house was a skeleton of 2x4s and exposed wiring, exactly as Brian had described at the barbecue. He'd been doing the electrical work himself, which meant no permits, no inspections, and no safety protocols. Perfect for what I had planned. We entered through the back door, which Brian had left unlocked out of rural complacency. The main breaker box was mounted on the far wall, its metal cover already showing signs of rust from the lake humidity. This is amateur hour, Theo muttered, examining the wiring with his flashlight. Half these connections are loose. Can you make it look like an accident? Kid, this is already an accident waiting to happen. I just need to accelerate the timeline. He opened his toolbox and went to work. The beauty of electrical fires is their unpredictability. A loose connection creates heat. Heat creates more resistance. More resistance creates more heat. Eventually, the cycle becomes self-sustaining until something ignites. Theo loosened 3 connections in the main panel and stripped back the insulation on a ground wire that ran behind the drywall. Then he rigged a small delay mechanism using a timer and a heating element. When the timer activates, this will create a short circuit, he explained. The breaker should trip, but with these loose connections, it might not trip fast enough. The wire behind the wall will heat up and ignite the insulation. How long? 4 hours, give or take. We were back in my truck by 2:45 a.m. I dropped Theo at his shop and drove home, where I found Melinda sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee and red-rimmed eyes. "Where were you?" she asked. "Couldn't sleep. Went for a drive." She nodded absently. "The kids were asking about the dinner party, about why you showed those pictures. What did you tell them? That sometimes adults have disagreements." "That's one way to put it." She looked up at me with something approaching hatred. "You destroyed my life in front of our friends. You destroyed our marriage in front of our children. I just made it public. What happens now?" I poured myself a glass of water and sat across from her. "Now you decide whether you want to try saving what's left of this family, or if you want to run off with Brian and abandon the kids you claim to love. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. You made your choice 16 years ago when you got pregnant with another man's children and lied about it. Everything since then has been you trying to avoid the consequences." Her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and her face went pale. "He wants to meet tomorrow to talk about custody arrangements. Are you going?" "I don't know." I leaned back in my chair. "If you do, there won't be anything left for you to come back to." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've spent the last month legally protecting myself and our assets. If you abandon this family, you'll do it with nothing but the clothes on your back." Her eyes widened. "Logan, what did you do?" "I planned ahead, like I always do." The timer in Brian's lake house would activate in 3.5 hours. I went upstairs and climbed into bed, setting my alarm for 6 a.m. By the time it went off, Brian Russo would be dealing with insurance investigators and fire marshals, trying to explain how his electrical work had gone so catastrophically wrong. Melinda never came to bed. When I woke up, she was gone. Her car was missing, her purse was gone, and there was a note on the kitchen counter. "I'm sorry, I'm going to try to fix this. Don't wait up." I made breakfast for Emma and Jacob, helped them get ready for school, and kissed them goodbye like it was any other morning. They chattered about homework and friends, blissfully unaware that their world was about to collapse. At 6:47 a.m., my phone rang, unknown number. "Logan, this is Brian." "Morning, Brian. How's the lake house project going?" "It burned down. The whole ducking thing burned down." I managed to sound shocked. "Jesus, what happened?" "Electrical fire." The fire chief says it was faulty wiring. "That's terrible. Anyone hurt?" "Mel was here when it happened. We barely got out." My blood froze. "Melinda was there?" "She came over last night. We were talking about the kids, about how to handle this situation. Around 6 this morning, we smelled smoke. By the time we realized what was happening, the whole back wall was engulfed." "Is she okay?" "Shaken up, but okay." "Logan, I think someone did this on purpose." I let silence fill the line for several seconds. "Why would you think that?" "The timing, right after our confrontation at the Hendersons." "Brian, I was home all night. You can ask my neighbors if you want. I'm not accusing you directly, but this feels like more than coincidence. Sometimes old houses just burn down, especially when the electrical work isn't up to code." His voice turned cold. "Duck you. Where's Melinda now?" "Hospital, smoke inhalation. She'll be fine, but they want to keep her for observation." "I'll be right there." "Don't bother. She doesn't want to see you." The line went dead. I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of breakfast and the quiet aftermath of destruction. Emma's math homework was still spread across the table. Jacob's toy trucks were parked in a neat row by the window. My phone rang again. This time it was Detective Martinez from the Sheriff's Department. "Mr. Adams, I'm calling about a house fire on Lakeshore Drive. Your wife was apparently at the scene?" "Yes, Brian Russo just called me." "Is Melinda okay?" She's at the hospital, but she'll be fine. I'm calling because there might be some irregularities with the fire. We'll need to ask you some questions. Of course. Whatever you need. Can you account for your whereabouts last night between midnight and 6 a.m.? I was home. Couldn't sleep, so I went for a drive around 2 a.m. Came back around 3. My neighbors might have seen my truck. Anyone else who can verify that? My children were asleep upstairs, but you're welcome to check with the neighbors. We will. Mr. Adams, were you aware that your wife was having an affair with Mr. Russo? The question hung in the air like smoke. Detective, half the neighborhood became aware of that 3 nights ago. It's not exactly a secret anymore. I see. And how did you feel about that revelation? How do you think I felt? Angry enough to want revenge? I chose my words carefully. Detective, I'm a structural engineer. When I have a problem, I solve it with documentation and legal procedures, not arson. If I wanted to hurt Brian Russo, I'd sue him for alienation of affection, not burn down his house. That's a very logical response. I'm a logical person. After Martinez hung up, I sat in the quiet house and waited for the next shoe to drop. It didn't take long. At 9:15 a.m., my phone rang again. This time, it was someone from the IRS. Mr. Russo? This is Agent Patricia Coleman from the Criminal Investigation Division. We need to discuss some irregularities with your tax filings. I almost smiled. I think you have the wrong number. This is Logan Adams. Oh, my apologies. Is this a number associated with Brian Russo or his business? Not that I'm aware of. You might try his construction company. Thank you. After she hung up, I allowed myself a small moment of satisfaction. The anonymous tip I'd filed about Brian's cash transactions had worked its way through the bureaucracy with typical government efficiency. By noon, Brian would be dealing with fire investigators, insurance adjusters, tax auditors, and hospital bills. Melinda would be choosing between a man whose life was collapsing and a husband who held all the cards. And I would be planning the final moves in a game I'd been playing since the moment I learned the truth about my children. Justice was methodical. But it was also inevitable. The offshore account had been established 3 months earlier through a law firm in the Cayman Islands. Perfectly legal, completely untraceable, and funded with assets that technically belonged to Meridian Holdings, LLC, the shell company tied to Melinda's Social Security number. I sat in Cheryl Moss's office on Friday afternoon, signing the final transfer documents while she explained the legal implications. Once these funds are moved offshore, they'll be protected from domestic litigation, she said. Even if your wife files for divorce and demands asset disclosure, these accounts won't appear on any U.S. financial records. And the LLC debts will remain tied to your wife's personal credit and Social Security number. As the power of attorney holder, she's legally responsible for any obligations incurred by the company. I signed the last document with a flourish. How much debt are we talking about? Approximately $400,000. Business loans, equipment purchases, contractor payments for work that was never actually performed. All legitimate on paper? Completely. The documentation is flawless. Any investigation will show that Meridian Holdings engaged in speculative real estate ventures that failed to generate revenue. Your wife, as the primary signatory, bears full legal responsibility. I stood up and shook her hand. Thank you, Cheryl. This has been very thorough work. I hope you never need to use these protections. So do I. But we both knew I would. That evening, I took Emma and Jacob out for pizza while Melinda was still at the hospital. They chattered about school and friends, blissfully unaware that their father was systematically destroying their mother's life. Is Mommy sick? Emma asked, twirling cheese around her fork. She's fine, sweetheart. Just had a little accident. She'll be home tomorrow. What kind of accident? She was at a friend's house when there was a small fire. She breathed some smoke, but the doctors say she'll be perfectly okay. Jacob looked worried. Will our house catch fire? No, buddy. Our house is safe. I made sure of that. After dinner, we stopped at the grocery store to pick up ingredients for Melinda's favorite soup. I wanted everything to appear normal when she returned home. While the kids picked out ice cream, I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Brian, 2 from Detective Martinez, and 1 from a number I didn't recognize. I called the unknown number first. Adams' residence. Mr. Adams? This is Carol Henderson. I wanted to apologize for the other night. No need, Carol. You were a gracious hostess under difficult circumstances. I also wanted to let you know. Some people in the neighborhood have been talking about what happened. About what you showed us? I'm sure they have. The general consensus is that you were within your rights. What Melinda did, it wasn't fair to you or the children. I appreciate that, Carol. If there's anything Ted and I can do to help, just keep an eye on Emma and Jacob. They're going through a lot right now. Of course. They're welcome at our house anytime. After I hung up, I realized that public opinion had shifted in my favor. The Neighborhood Sympathy Network would support me through whatever came next, which would be crucial for maintaining custody. That night, I went through the house methodically, removing any evidence of my recent activities. Bank statements, legal documents, correspondence with Nora and Theo. Everything went into a fireproof safe in my garage workshop. I also planted several items that would support my narrative. Marriage counseling brochures, printouts about dealing with infidelity, research on custody rights for non-biological parents. If investigators searched the house, they'd find the evidence of a man trying to save his marriage, not destroy it. Melinda came home Saturday morning, looking exhausted and smelling faintly of smoke. The kids ran to hug her, and for a moment the scene looked almost normal. "How are you feeling?" I asked. "Like I've been hit by a truck." "The important thing is that you're safe." She studied my face, searching for some sign of the man who'd orchestrated her humiliation. But I'd put that version of myself away, at least temporarily. "Logan, we need to talk. After the kids go to bed." She nodded and went upstairs to shower. That evening, after Emma and Jacob were asleep, we sat in the living room like two strangers sharing a waiting area. "Brian's in serious trouble," she said. "I heard fire, taxes, city violations. When it rains, it pours. You did this." "I did what?" "All of it. The fire, the IRS investigation, the permit problems. You orchestrated everything." I shook my head sadly. "Mel, I think the stress is making you paranoid. Brian's problems stem from his own poor decisions." "You're lying." "Am I? Can you prove any of it?" She stared at me for a long moment, then reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. "I've hired a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce." "That's your choice. I want custody of the children." "On what grounds?" "You've been having an affair. You abandoned them to spend the night with your lover, and you nearly died in a fire because you weren't home where you belonged." Her face crumpled. "They're my children." "Are they?" "Because according to the DNA tests, they're Brian's children." "Which makes you what exactly? A woman who lied to everyone for 10 years about paternity?" "You bastard." "No, Melinda. I'm the man who raised your lover's children as his own, supported your career, paid your bills, and loved you unconditionally until I discovered that our entire marriage was built on lies." She started crying then, deep sobs that shook her whole body. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to disappear," I said quietly. "I want you to take your lover and your lies and get out of my house. I want you to leave Emma and Jacob with the only father they've ever known, and I want you to never come back." "I can't do that." "Yes, you can. Because if you don't, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of mother abandons her children to play house with her ex-husband." She looked up at me through her tears. "How did you become so cruel?" "You taught me." The next morning, she was gone, packed a single suitcase and left while the kids were still asleep. No goodbye, no explanation, just a note saying she needed time to think. I made breakfast and explained to Emma and Jacob that Mommy was taking a little vacation to clear her head. They seemed to accept it with the resilience of children who'd learned not to ask too many questions about adult problems. By noon, I'd changed the locks. By evening, I'd started the process of legally adopting the children I'd always considered mine. Melinda could have her lover and her drama and her burning houses, but Emma and Jacob belonged to me. The arrest happened on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing blueprints for a new medical complex. Detective Martinez called at 9:15 a.m. with news that made my coffee taste like victory. "Thought you'd want to know. We arrested Brian Russo this morning on multiple charges." "What kind of charges?" "Tax evasion, insurance fraud, and criminal negligence in connection with the house fire." The IRS investigation turned up some interesting discrepancies in his business records. I set down my pencil. "That's unfortunate. Gets worse. His insurance company is refusing to pay the claim. They think the fire was deliberately set to cover up financial problems. By Brian, that's their theory. Man builds a house he can't afford, does substandard electrical work, then burns it down when the tax bill comes due. Seems a little far-fetched. Maybe, but the evidence is compelling. We found accelerant residue near the electrical panel, and the fire started in exactly the spot where his wiring violations were most severe. I almost smiled. Theo had been thorough. What about Melinda? She was there when it happened. We're treating her as a witness for now, but if we determine she knew about the insurance fraud scheme, that could change. After Martinez hung up, I called Nora to get an update on Melinda's situation. She's living in a motel on Highway 9, Nora reported. Paid week to week with cash, no steady income, no credit cards, no vehicle registration. What's she doing for money? Good question. I've seen her at the unemployment office twice, but with her legal troubles, finding work won't be easy. Legal troubles? The IRS froze her accounts yesterday. Apparently, there's a company called Meridian Holdings with some serious tax liabilities tied to her Social Security number. I feigned surprise. I've never heard of that company. Neither had she, from what I could tell. Spent 3 hours at the IRS office trying to sort it out. Keep watching her. I want to know if she tries to contact the kids. Will do. That afternoon, I picked up Emma and Jacob from school and took them to their grandmother's house, Melinda's mother, who lived 20 minutes away in a retirement community. Dorothy Walsh was 73, sharp as a tack, and had never particularly liked me, but she loved her grandchildren, and I needed allies in what was coming. Logan, this is a surprise, she said, opening the door to find us on her doorstep. Where's Melinda? That's what I wanted to talk to you about. Kids? Why don't you go play in the backyard while Grandma and I chat? Emma and Jacob ran off to explore Dorothy's garden, leaving us alone in her small living room. Melinda and I are having some problems, I said. She's been staying with friends while we try to work things out. Dorothy's eyes narrowed. What kind of problems? She's been seeing her ex-husband. The children don't know yet. The older woman's face went pale. Brian? She's seeing Brian again? You knew about him. I knew she wasn't over him when you two got married. I hoped she'd moved on. So did I. Dorothy sat down heavily in her recliner. Those poor children. They must be so confused. I'm trying to keep things stable for them, but Melinda, she's making choices that put Emma and Jacob at risk. What do you mean? I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo that Nora had taken the night of the fire. Melinda and Brian embracing outside the burning lake house while firefighters worked in. In the background. She was with him when his house burned down. She could have been killed. Dorothy studied the photo with growing horror. She left the children alone? She left them with me. But yes, she abandoned her family to be with another man. I can't believe this. I'm worried about her state of mind. She's facing financial problems, legal troubles, and she's made some very poor decisions lately. What can I do? If she contacts you, please let me know. The kids need stability right now, and Melinda, she's not capable of providing that. Dorothy nodded slowly. You're a good father, Logan. Those children are lucky to have you. Thank you. That means a lot. When we left an hour later, I had Dorothy's promise to support my custody case if it became necessary. That evening, while the kids did homework at the kitchen table, I received a call from an unknown number. Logan? It's me. Melinda's voice was small, defeated. Where are you? Does it matter? I need to see the kids. That's not a good idea right now. They're my children. Are they? Because your boyfriend seems to think otherwise. Silence stretched between us. I heard about Brian's arrest, I continued. Tax evasion, insurance fraud. You really know how to pick them. I had nothing to do with that. Tell it to the IRS. I understand they've frozen your accounts. Logan, please. I just want to see Emma and Jacob, and I want to protect them from the chaos you've created. I'm their mother. You're a woman who lied about their paternity, abandoned them for your ex-husband, and nearly died in a fire because you were too busy playing house to be home where you belonged. Her voice broke. I made mistakes. Yes, you did. And now you're living with the consequences. What do you want from me? I want you to sign custody papers. I want you to officially relinquish your parental rights so these kids can have a stable home. I won't do that. Then you'll lose them anyway. The difference is, if you fight me, it'll be messy and public and traumatic for Emma and Jacob. If you cooperate, we can do this quietly. You're blackmailing me. I'm offering you a choice. Sign the papers, and I'll make sure you get supervised visitation once a month. Fight me, and you'll be lucky to see them on birthdays. She was crying now, soft sobs that carried through the phone line. I love them. If you love them, you'll do what's best for them. And what's best is a stable home with a father who's been there since day one. Brian is their father. Brian is a convicted felon facing prison time. Not exactly Father of the Year material. This isn't over. Yes, it is. You just haven't accepted it yet. She hung up without another word. I set the phone aside and looked at Emma and Jacob, bent over their homework with the focused concentration of children who'd learned to find security in routine. Tomorrow, I'd call my lawyer and start the formal custody proceedings. Tomorrow, I'd begin the final phase of erasing Melinda from our lives. But tonight, I'd help my kids with their math homework and read them bedtime stories the same way I had every night for the past 10 years. Because some things, the important things, never change. The bus to Laredo cost $47 and took 6 hours through flat Texas countryside that stretched like brown paper toward the horizon. I sat in the back, wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap, with a carry-on bag containing everything I needed for my new life. The adoption papers had been finalized 3 weeks earlier. Emma and Jacob Adams, legally mine, in every way that mattered. Dorothy Walsh had been granted supervised visitation rights, ensuring the kids would maintain family connections without Melinda's destructive influence. Brian was serving 18 months in federal prison for tax evasion. His construction company had folded, his assets seized, his reputation destroyed. Even if he served the minimum sentence, he'd emerge to find his former life completely erased. Melinda had signed the custody documents without a fight. She'd had no choice. Her lawyer had explained that fighting would only expose her to criminal charges related to the Meridian Holdings fraud. Better to sign quietly and disappear than face prison alongside her boyfriend. The last time I'd seen her was at the courthouse, hollow-eyed and wearing a dress that looked like it came from a thrift store. She'd nodded once when our eyes met across the hallway, a gesture that could have meant anything or nothing. Now I sat on a Greyhound bus with a new passport, a briefcase full of cash, and the satisfaction of a job completed perfectly. My phone had been turned off and discarded in a Dallas bus station dumpster 3 hours ago. The GPS tracker in my truck would show it parked at Austin Bergstrom Airport, where I'd left it in long-term parking with a note saying I needed time to grieve. Everyone would assume I'd taken a flight somewhere to process my divorce and custody battle. They'd be partly right. I was processing, just not in the way they imagined. The bus pulled into Laredo at 4:30 p.m., desert heat shimmering off the pavement like water. I walked 6 blocks to a small hotel that didn't require credit cards, paid cash for 3 nights, and locked the door behind me. Then I opened my laptop and accessed the offshore accounts one final time, transferring the remaining funds to a bank in Ensenada where they'd be waiting when I arrived. The money would last years if I lived carefully. Long enough to disappear completely, maybe start over somewhere new, or long enough to watch from a distance as the consequences of 16 years of lies played out in the lives of the people who'd betrayed me. The next morning, I walked across the border like any other tourist, carrying my new identity and my old grudges in equal measure. Ensenada was exactly what I'd expected. Dusty streets, cheap beer, and enough American expats that one more wouldn't attract attention. I found a small apartment 2 blocks from the beach, paid 6 months' rent in advance, and bought a chair for the balcony. On my 3rd day in Mexico, I walked to a newsstand and bought an English-language newspaper from San Diego. The story was buried on page 7, but the headline made me smile. Local woman loses custody after fraud charges. The article was brief but comprehensive. Melinda Walsh Adams, 36, had been charged with conspiracy to commit fraud in connection with a shell company called Meridian Holdings. She was facing up to 5 years in federal prison and had lost custody of her 2 children to her ex-husband. The reporter had done good work, detailing how Melinda had allegedly used her position as a social worker to establish fraudulent business entities, then defaulted on hundreds of thousands in loans while transferring assets to offshore accounts. Of course, the article didn't mention that she'd been completely unaware of the scheme. Truth was less important than narrative, and the narrative was clear. Irresponsible mother loses children due to criminal behavior. I finished my beer and walked down to the beach, where the Pacific Ocean stretched toward the horizon like an endless promise of possibilities. My phone had been replaced with a cheap burner that couldn't be traced to my old identity. No social media, no email accounts, no digital footprints. Logan Adams was slowly fading from existence, leaving behind only the legal documents that secured Emma and Jacob's future. That evening, I sat on my balcony and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and red. The colors reminded me of fire, which seemed appropriate. A text message arrived on my burner phone from an unknown number. Package delivered as requested. T. Theo had completed his final task. The USB drive containing all the evidence of my investigation, DNA tests, surveillance photos, financial records, had been anonymously mailed to Melinda's last known address. Now she'd know exactly how thoroughly she'd been played. How every move she'd made for the past 6 months had been anticipated and countered. How her lover's downfall had been orchestrated with the same precision I brought to structural engineering. She'd know, but she'd never be able to prove it. I deleted the message and dropped the phone into the ocean, watching it disappear beneath the waves like every other piece of my former life. The next morning, I walked to a small cafe and ordered breakfast. While I waited for my eggs, I picked up a discarded newspaper and found another story that caught my interest. Former social worker found dead in motel room. My hands didn't shake as I read the details. Melinda Walsh Adams, 36, had been discovered in her room at the Highway 9 Motor Lodge, apparently from an overdose of prescription medication. No suicide note, but investigators suspected depression related to her recent legal troubles and loss of custody. The article mentioned that she'd been scheduled to begin serving her prison sentence the following month. I finished my breakfast slowly, tasting each bite. Then I folded the newspaper and left it on the table for the next customer. Outside, the Mexican sun was warm on my face. Street vendors called out in Spanish, children played soccer in the dusty plaza, and life continued with the casual indifference of a world that had never known Logan Adams or Melinda Walsh or the quiet war they'd fought in suburban kitchens and courthouse hallways. I walked to the beach and sat in the sand, watching waves roll endlessly toward shore. Emma and Jacob would grow up believing their mother had been a troubled woman who'd made bad choices. They'd remember me as the father who'd protected them from her instability, who'd fought for custody when she couldn't care for them properly. They'd never know that their real father was serving time in federal prison, or that their legal father had disappeared to Mexico with stolen money and a new identity. They'd never know that their mother's death had been as carefully orchestrated as everything else in my revenge. Some secrets were worth keeping. I smiled, not because I'd won, but because justice didn't need to make noise to hurt. At the end,